Okay, hello and welcome to another edition of the Same Old Stripes podcast. We're getting there, T.O. We're just Joe Burrow's number of days away from the draft. 8 days when you guys are going to be hearing this away from the 2023 NFL draft, where the Bengals are going to be picking 28th. Your mock drafts should be reaching their final form. You should be ready to submit your final copy. We're going to talk a little bit about the draft today. Max Toscano is going to be joining us from In the Valley Shook. He covers the Bengals, or he's an X's and O's guys over there, and he covers the Bengals extensively. But T.O. and I are going to cover a little Bengals news and talk about some of that stuff before we get started. So before we do that, T.O., we already had an interview. We've already talked a lot. But how are you, man? How are things?
As the great Tyler Dragon would say, a lot better than Suns fans. It's a terrible inside joke, but for you guys that don't know, I'm a Suns fan, and they're down 0-1, and big game tonight. So, poor joke. So sorry on my end, but how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I actually like that joke, Tia. I got that. That was a reference for you and me. But I think that we don't have as much to talk about because the Bengals haven't been as newsy in recent weeks as the league kind of slows down, kind of gets ready for the draft. We don't expect to see a ton of movement because teams aren't usually moving around a lot with players until they finish out their draft classes. And the Bengals are at least having some visits for their 2023 draft class. I think two of the most interesting names that have come up over the last week or so are top 30 visits they had with both Michael Mayer and Dalton Kincaid. Those are, I think, consensus across the board for the most part. The two top tight ends in this draft class on most boards you're going to find. So Bengals definitely have a need at tight end. They called Irv Smith the Hayden Hurst role. I don't think that we have to read too much into that. At this point, there's a lot still to learn about this Bengals team. But Tio, I think that I would first like to hear your thoughts on the idea of going tight end in round one, and then just kind of how interesting you think it is that these two guys are guys they've targeted for top 30 visits.
Yeah, initially when the Kincaid one came out after Sample had been re-signed, it kind of felt like, well, it makes a little bit more sense now because you have Sample for the blocking role. Kincaid can kind of be your receiving threat at the tight end, go along with Irv Smith, obviously. And Mayer's been, a fan favorite since the get-go, I guess, since he declared. As far as how I feel about drafting a tight end at 28, man, it's this draft cycle has been such a whirlwind. It's like, I've been on Bijan Robinson at 28 train. I've been on tight end at 28. I've been on offensive line. Heck, I would even take JSN or a receiver at 28. So I've been all over the place. I think where I'm at now is realizing how good this tight end class is, to the point where if we were to grab a tight end with our first pick, I would rather them trade down, because I don't think there's a huge gap between whoever your top tight end is and who my top tight end is, who's Sam Laporta. For me, one of the best case scenarios would be trading down into the 40 range, 38, wherever you want. Grab Laporta if that's where you want to go, with a tight end with your first pick, and then, getting another third or late second to go with it. I think the real, I guess, nuts in this class are second and third round, I think, is where you're going to get a lot of the value. So that's kind of where I'm at. Where are you at on it?
I like where your head is at with this. The trade back thing is not a bad point at all. I mean, when you look at this crop of tight ends, the two top guys, like I mentioned, Mayer and Kincaid, the guys that visit with the Bengals, and then you have, behind them, you have guys like Sam Laporta, who lots of people love. You have Darnell Washington. You have, people love Luke Musgrave. There's Tucker Kraft, who you and I are as high on later in the draft. Even guys like Brenton Strange and Davis Allen. Brenton Strange of Penn State and Davis Allen of Clemson. Guys that people really like and have a lot of interest in this draft class. So trading back, I don't think hurts. And I think that there's work the Bengals could do in the second and third round. If they add a pick there, I think that only helps them, especially if you're going to go tight end. But I mean, I still don't know how I feel about that being the first pick on the board for this team. I don't know how I feel about that. I do think it's interesting they brought both in for visits. I mean, they also had a visit with Miles Murphy, who is a name I definitely would like a little bit more for this team. So I'm dog out of this room real fast. Great radio, everyone. I'm letting the dog out of the room. She's sounds like she's getting fed. There you go.
What a great dog, Dad.
Yeah. I hear Mom putting the food in the bowl downstairs, and it's time for the dog to go.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. I don't know, man. First round tight end just doesn't really jump out to me at this point. I wonder if teams make that easier for them. Daniel Jeremiah has Dalton Kincaid as his number 9 prospect. Michael Mayer is viewed as a very safe prospect that can add a lot to an offense immediately. So maybe they're put in a position where they don't have to get super aggressive on it. But hey, I think that we're on the same page with this one in a lot of ways. Trade back if you're going to go first round tight end, but still
Right.
not the way we want to go. I think a more fun conversation for you and I to have now, because there's just not a lot to talk about. And we're kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of this draft here. But when we're looking at the first 3 rounds of this draft, I think that we all kind of develop our crushes. And
Yeah.
Tio, for you right now, who is a guy that you would absolutely love to see the Bengals land in this class?
Oh, there's a lot, man. This is definitely the deepest I've gotten into this to a draft class, I guess. Like, I was looking back at last year and I'm like, wow, I still don't know a lot of these guys. But this year I feel comfortable 4.5, 5 rounds deep. Man, I'm really high on the Laporta guy. I love Sam Laporta, but my main guy is Tarvis Martin out of Illinois, excuse me. Number 21, a little bit of slot and a little bit of safety versatility. I just think he's going to be a dog, man, and I don't know how early he's going to go. I'm thinking probably 3rd round, but that would be such a fun pick. The problem with the Bengals and how it lines up this year, everyone wants a cornerback, everyone wants D-line, everyone wants a tight end, and everyone wants a – what one did I forget? Those 3, right?
Running back, I think he missed.
Running back, yeah.
Yeah.
The problem with it is if you don't go tight end with your first pick, I personally feel like you really need to go with it with your second pick, either via trade up or who's over there at 60. I don't think there's going to be that value that you really want there in the 3rd. Like I know a lot of people like that Kuntz. Odds of him working out probably aren't great. you know what I mean. So that's where I'm at. You're kind of limited once whoever you go with in the first round. If you do go with cornerback like Emmanuel Forbes, it kind of pigeonholes you to where you're either going to miss out on a tight end you really like, or you're going to miss out on a tackle you really like.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with not having enough picks. So revisiting the trade back option would be, maybe in their best interest.
So I think that's interesting to say. Is kind of we talked about maybe a guy you love, but maybe your move in general is to move back. I do like that as kind of a point. I will list off a name here, a guy that I just always thought is like the Bengals guy in this draft. Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame is the guy that just I can't get my eyes off of. First of all, I mean, he's 6'5" at 264 with 34-inch arms. So that's measurables out the wazoo for the Bengals. Super high motor, does a really good job with speed at his own size. He is a little stiff, doesn't bend his hips super well. But I mean, the length that he's going to give them potentially is a weapon they don't really have in the tool case right now. Sam Hubbard doesn't have crazy long arms. Trey Hendrickson obviously has shorter arms, famously. I mean, that's one of the reasons Saints fans were telling us, congratulations on paying him so much money. That worked out for them, didn't it? The PFF comp, I think, calls him Marcus Davenport. I don't know that I'd call him Marcus Davenport, but I think his length is really interesting. And, off the field, he's like a captain. I think he was an all honors kind of guy. So, I mean, all the boxes you're going to check for him. Leadership. Number 7 at Notre Dame, I believe, is a tradition, and he wore that number 7. It's like a historically notable number, is my understanding. Yeah, lots of great Notre Dame number 7s. I don't know. There's just something about it, man. I can't get off of it.
No,
Anyone else?
It.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Bengals fans would be happy with that too. That have been, clamoring to get a little bit more explosive on the edge. Sorry, I was taking a picture during this. So Todd and Mel have a 3-round mock draft that they're doing. It's on ESPN right now, and I am stunned. They just first 5 tight ends in the off the board. They have Dalton Kincaid going at 15, Michael Mayer at 24, Luke Musgraves at 40, Darnell Washington at 41, Benton Strange at 51. Where the hell is Sam Laporta?
Ladies and gentlemen, T.O.'s losing his mind in real time.
That would be, if Sam Laporta's there at 60, I think that's a no-brainer. But, I like the way you attack it, though, man. D-line's – the Bengals need to get more explosive, and that's why Cansey's in the consideration. I don't know if it's in the consideration for the Bengals, but within Bengal fandom, it is. That's why you hear all these edge rushers that could potentially be Bengals at 28. So I don't hate that name at all.
So we'll move to the other question I had sent over to you. Who is your kind of stay away guy right now? Maybe it's a guy you've seen mock to the Bengals over and over again, a guy you've heard a lot about, but who is a prospect that the more you think about it, the more you just don't like his fit with Cincinnati at all?
Yeah, Brian Breeze for me, and you knew that. I told you that a few days ago. But I just there's guys I like at 60 a lot more than him. Guys like Benton from Wisconsin screams out to me. Biggest thing with Breeze, I guess, for me is his contribution right away is one thing. I feel like at this point in time with the Bengals, you kind of need instant impact, whereas last year when they took Dax Hill, they had the luxury of letting him sit behind for a year. They didn't really have any needs. This year they have a few more needs, and their needs match up well with this draft class. If you can hit on your first, I would just say first 2 picks, even if you miss out on your third, whatever. If you can hit on instant impact guys right away that are going to play 500 plus snaps on offense or defense, whatever the pick is, I think you're doing yourself a service. Look at what the Chiefs did last year with that secondary, right? They lose to the Bengals, and what do? They rehaul, and they trust their rookies, and their rookies ball out. I think that's kind of where you need to get your value at this point in time, where the contracts are coming up. So I would rather go get an instant impact. Like, you go get Cansey, you're probably not keeping him off the field. You get Breeze, you probably feel a little bit more comfortable keeping him off the field. Whereas, I think what was his highest snap total his freshman year at Clemson?
Yeah.
Can he hold up? I don't know. And I'm not questioning it. I'm just throwing it out there, I guess. So I would rather go get someone with an instant impact. Even like Emmanuel Forbes, you could argue wouldn't get on the field right away. I promise you, man, if you got ball skills like that, you're going to see the field. There's no way around it. Whether that means moving someone to the slot and letting Mike Hilton play back at safety, I don't know. It's just he's going to find the field.
Yeah, and I like Brian Brzee more than you do for sure, but at the same time, it's hard for anyone to feel comfortable overlooking lack of college production and lack of health at the college level. It's just impossible to overlook. And he's still a younger guy, but torn ACL 2 years ago, and not that impressive of production. His final season at Clemson is definitely going to be a red flag for him for a lot of teams. The stay away guy for me, a little bit off the beaten path, but it's a name I've seen come up in some mock drafts lately. Devin Achane from Texas A&M. Some of the best speed in this class, has track speed, has incredibly good contact balance for a player of his size. I mean, lots of different things that you'd love to see. I mean, when you have a guy that can play is like a little pinball on tape, it's pretty impressive. For me, at 5'8", he's just not going to stand up to the test of time in the AFC North as a bell cow. And, maybe we're past the days of bell cows. Maybe that's part of this formula, but at the same time, I can't do 5'8", man. Not five. What is he? 5'8", 215? 5'8", 188. Yeah, man, I can't do that in the AFC North. So I think that maybe if he's a guy that's for whatever reason sitting there in the 5th round, and maybe he's your double up because my guy Roschon Johnson is our 3rd round pick, and you're doubling up with that. But I can't do Devin Achane, man. I have a real big issue with the size in the AFC North, and again, I don't know. I'm having trouble with that one. You have any thoughts on Devin Achane and the Bengals?
No, that's interesting. I did not think that's where you were going to go with it. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. I don't know where they're going to go out running back. The report from Paul Daner kind of just gave you an outlook on what maybe the Bengals' intentions are. I don't know. There's a lot of running backs in this class, man. And as you see, you can get value late. You can get value early. It just depends on what you want to do with it, I guess. Roschon Johnson's, yeah, absolutely, man. That screams Bengals, and that would be fun.
I mean, it's a fun running back draft class, man. And we'll kind of wrap up here and get into our interview with Max. But, I mean, there's just so many different kinds of running backs that you can put in your offense and do different things. I think it's such a cool opportunity to double up and get 2 very different types of players.
And with the double up, man, that's kind of where the trade back would help you a lot to get that 8th or 9th pick. But spending 2 picks on a running back would be tough if you only have 7, So I'm with you though.
Well, we'll leave it there for now. Next time we talk, we'll be talking. You'll be hearing Max, and then you're going to be hearing the Cincy Hat, and then we have an awesome guest for you guys next week. Just awesome. So stay tuned to that. That's all we got for now. Here's our conversation with Max. Okay, I hit the record button successfully, Tio. I didn't forget to do it. Joining us now on the Same Old Stripes podcast, first time guest for you guys. He's an X's and O's writer over at And the Valley Shook, which does a really good job highlighting Louisiana State Bayou Bengals. For all of you LSU fans out there that came up and joined us in Cincinnati from the Joe Burrow wagon, Max Toscano is on the show today, and we're really excited to have him on the show. We're going to talk about some of, he wrote a really good article breaking down some offensive film from the Bengals from the 2022 season, and we're going to kind of put it in the context of the draft. So it's really good timing for this conversation. Your Rangers are in the playoffs tonight, man, so we're joining you on a busy night. But how are things? How are you?
Yeah, things are good. Things are good. It's kind of interesting because the draft is. I feel like I've paid so much less attention to it than I normally do. Just because I started a new job. The Rangers are good again. When the Rangers were bad in the last couple of years, I just been spending this time so focused on the draft because there's nothing else going on because the Mets have never been good to me. But it's kind of interesting because I don't think that the draft gets less interesting because your team is good. I think that the Bengals are in such an interesting spot with the fact that they're about to get expensive in the next couple of years with Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. And all of a sudden, the draft is so important again because you have to get young and cheap. So it just sort of changes from hoping you can find your way out of the bottom of the league into hoping you can stay at the top because we know how fragile it is. So the draft almost gets scarier, which I'm definitely feeling because we saw with the Bills over the last couple of years, if you screw up the draft, the team below your top guys is just going to hollow right out. So it's certainly an interesting time of the year for the Bengals.
I think the fear is a really good way to put it. It makes it a lot more dramatic. You got to get this right, especially in a window where you're about to start paying the quarterback. So that's when you really start to sweat. Oh, that starts to matter a little bit more.
Sorry, the Rangers scored. Let's go.
Hey, that's crazy.
I like feeling something big happened. This podcast is electric, folks.
Oh God, we're gonna win the cup. It's gonna happen.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's gonna happen. It's finally, they were close last year. I was kind of hoping they'd push through the Eastern Conference. This is not a Rangers podcast. We're gonna get totally off.
Yeah.
This is what we do to ourselves. I want to talk about something I found really interesting in your piece. It's obviously how it starts. It's right at the top. It's about the Tampa 2 approach to facing the Bengals offense last year, which kind of made for a very different feel. Obviously, made them get a lot more creative, made them get a lot more efficient. But I think that it does kind of make me wonder. I mean, what's the formula for a more explosive offense for the Bengals in 2023 for you? Because it definitely was kept a little bit more underneath and over the middle and that kind of stuff in 2022 with Tampa 2.
Well, I mean, yeah, for sure. It's good. And the thing about Tampa 2 is that like we haven't really seen it as anything more than like a third down changeup in like 15 years. And so the Bengals aren't the only team that saw this. Kansas City saw it a lot. Buffalo saw it a ton because they're built very similarly offensively to the Bengals. And like, I think that, it's going to be interesting because they sort of have a couple ways of approaching it. I think if teams are really going to live in Tampa 2 and not just 2 high looks broadly that they can do different things out of, the Bengals actually have figured it out. Because they can hit those 15-yard digs over the middle over and over and over and over. And while that's not necessarily super explosive, I think that teams now, once they figured out exactly how to do that on a down-to-down basis, I think that it really started to sketch teams out about playing Tampa 2. So I think they sort of figured that out. Because like one thing I vividly remember before the Chiefs game, and look, Chris Jones blew everything up because they couldn't block him. But, there were real discussions about whether or not Kansas City should just gamble and play tight and say, like, we're going to take away all this high percentage stuff you keep doing over and over and over and over on the Bills. So I think that they've, in a lot of ways, figured it out. But I think in terms of getting more, or at least as it pertains to Tampa 2, I think what the Ravens have discovered, and I think is the thing that really concerns me, is that you could start in these 2 high looks at the snap and rotate out of them so that after the snap, so that you can take away all the stuff that they do to attack Tampa 2 in quarters and make it, inefficient and get them into late downs. And that's tough for everybody. It's easier for the Bengals than most teams because of who their quarterback is, but it's still not favorable. So I think the key to being more explosive for the Bengals is to force teams to show their hand a little bit and make that safety play in the box. And that's good. And, we're getting old school in football again. That involves, running the ball. And they want to do it in 11 personnel, which is 3 receivers, 1 tight end, 1 back. That's hard unless your offensive line is really, really, really good. And you have a really big tight end that can block, or you have a quarterback that can steal an extra number with his legs like the Eagles do.
Yep.
So I think that the Bengals need to have a changeup, right? I think they need to develop a changeup off their spread and be able to get heavy and hit play action off of that when they get the looks, just to have a counter. That's not to say that the Bengals should stop being a spread offense. I just think that they need to develop a little bit of a changeup in their back pocket, which they don't have. But I mean, look, the fact of the matter is they are going to be a good offense no matter what. But as far as maximizing it and becoming truly undefendable, I think that they need to do what the Chiefs did going into this past year, which is get more diverse in your personnel groupings and be able to present these heavy personnel groupings that force teams to get that guy down in the box, or else they're going to give up 250 on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful, and it does kind of lead me to another conversation I wanted to go down. This change up you kind of talk about, I think that's kind of the reality. I mean, you're always going to have to change your offense and all that good stuff. I think that I've seen you talk a lot about shifting to more 12 personnel, which is something the Bengals have not. They've played more 11 personnel than just about anyone over the last couple of years. But what's your thoughts on maybe a tight end that would allow them, or maybe a couple tight ends that come to mind in this draft class that could allow them to maybe shift to more of that approach? Because Irv Smith gives you one thing. Drew Sample's not going to be the guy that, is your change up in your offense. So I'm curious about your perspective on that, because obviously Bengals fans, on at least on Twitter and I'm sure on Facebook and bars and wherever else you talk about football, tight ends are very interesting in this draft class.
Yeah, and it's certainly been interesting to kind of see everybody recognize that need at the same time as I've kind of come to grips with it a little bit. I think that the re-signing of Drew Sample, which I actually didn't really expect, changes things a little bit in the fact that, like, hypothetically, if the board shakes out a certain way and you really don't want to reach on the tight end, that you can play right away, like, because if you take a guy in the 5th, 6th round, you're probably not going to throw the world on his shoulders right away, at any position, let alone tight end, which is a bit more developmental. I think that if you want to have a 12 personnel changeup with Drew Sample in line as your blocker and Irv Smith as your move guy, that's not the best. It's not, what the Seahawks are presenting with Disley and Fant, who I really, just a pair I really, really like. Or what Georgia presented with Bowers and Washington last year on the extreme end. It's not quite that, but it's functional. And I think it does what you need to do, which is create one-on-ones for your receivers on the outside, which is just death for defenses. I mean, they can't survive in that situation. So I think that it changes things a little bit in that it allows you to be a little bit more flexible in who you target. I think before they re-signed Sample, I thought they really desperately needed a guy who can block. I thought if they went into the season with Irv Smith and like Dalton Kincaid, they would never be able to run the ball. I mean, they just those guys aren't blockers. They're tiny. Kincaid's bigger, but like he's still, in my opinion, undersized for what I think tight ends are about to become again. But like, so I think their options, that's a long-winded way of saying, I think their options are back open. So if they want to say, we think Michael Mayer is the best of all the worlds, we've seen him do some pretty cool things as a receiver, and he's not too undersized. I don't love the short arms as far as, scooping out DNs, but like they want to say like that's our guy. Let's see what we can develop him into. They can do that. They want to say, if they want to think really exactly like me and say, we have a guy who can play in the core and block his ass off, and Drew Sample, let's go get Dalton Kincaid, who we think can be our 12 personnel changeup guy, get him out there, move him around, and, create some matchups. I think that could work too. Personally, I still think they should go with Darnell, just because like it maybe not in the first round, because I think they are in best player available mode just because they need to get good, young, and cheap where they can. But like the idea of Darnell Washington, I mean, to me, I think it does so much for the run game, because I mean, look at him. And like you have a quarterback who is, in my opinion, the best, and this is very specific, the best above the rim thrower in the NFL.
Yeah,
I think like we've seen him do it with Higgins and Chase all the time.
Yeah.
Where he's so good at seeing a defender turn his, with his back turn, just putting it above the rim and letting a guy go up and get it. Darnell's 30 feet tall. I mean, he doesn't have a great vertical, but like his hands live where somebody's vertical would be anyway. So I really think that that's an interesting combination of, specific skill sets where you can just throw balls above the rim to him in the seam and in the red zone, get 25 catches out of him that are, explosive, of high value, and get a boost to your run game. I think that's my favorite fit. And of course, personally, my favorite tight end in the class is Tucker Kraft, just because I think that he is the guy. And I'm not a huge believer in taking tight ends for the sake of being safe about it. I think if you're going to do that, it's probably Mayer, but with Kraft, I think he's the only guy that can really become a George Kittle, Dallas Goedert do it all, because he's got the arm length, he's got the frame, he's got the short area quickness to run choice routes and digs and all those change of direction stuff that those guys do. And he does some freaky stuff on tape, and I think that you can really develop with him. But man, they have a lot of options, right? I mean, like there's so many tight ends they can go with. Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion in the later rounds, mid later rounds, because who's a freak. I mean, he's literally, according to Math Bombs RAS, the most athletic tight end of all time
ever.
Like, so shit. I mean, do whatever. Like,
Yeah.
now that you re-signed Sample, you can do whatever you want.
I do like the sandbox they've given themselves. They've got much more of an open world to pick their tight end, and it's a good class to need a mid-round tight end in a lot of ways. Early to mid-round is probably a better sweet spot, but I like that idea a lot. I mean, I don't think Bengals fans are as excited about signing Drew Sample as we might be on this podcast. T.O. knows.
He's one of those. He's a nice piece of the machine. Like you got to have him.
And people got to understand it. He's not a second round pick value anymore, folks. He's just the guy on the roster. He's not making very much money.
Yeah, they're not paying him like that.
No, it's funny. You should have seen Bengals Twitter right after the signing.
I'm sure he saw it.
I saw it. Yeah, it was a disaster.
Yeah, my favorite take was the Bengals won't draft a tight end anymore. So, stupid. Whatever. I kind of want to jump in and ask you because you were talking about getting more explosive, maybe going 12 personnel, stuff like that. How much of it do you think has to do with the running back? You look at a guy like Bijan who breaks every tackle, and then you look at a guy like, Joe Mixon last year who really had the, I think, second lowest elusive rating in the NFL. What do you think a guy like Bijan Robinson or, Rashard Johnson had a nice broken tackle rate as well? Someone like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's another way to kind of solve the problem. I think what we saw with, a team that Zach Taylor was actually a part of with the Rams back during the Todd Gurley era. Yes, they had receivers that can block their asses off, which is the biggest reason they ran the ball so well out of 11. But the other reason is that, like, you got to make up that number somewhere, right? Whether that's an extra blocker, whether that's the RPO, whether that's, punishing single high looks with play action and one-on-ones on the outside. You got to make up that extra number. And a running back who can make that guy miss is a way to do that. So I think if Bijan Robinson were there at 28, which he will not be, I doubt it.
No.
If we are so lucky, I think that's a great pick. Because because he can really do everything. They teach their backs to pass protect there at Texas. They took him off the field in third downs because Roshan Johnson was so much better at it. But I think he can figure it out. He's such a good pass catcher. He's a route runner. He makes guys miss. His whole thing is cleaning up that extra guy. So that makes a big difference. It really does. The Bengals running game, at least their backfield had no juice. They can't clean up that extra guy, and just the threat of creating from the perspective of a defensive coordinator, even if more often than not they're going for 4 or 5 yards, the threat of having a guy with that light of a box and that much space who can maybe make one guy miss and take it for 60, that scares you, and that changes how you think about things. So that's one way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, Bijan, me and Willie have kind of been back and forth on this. We've been on the Bijan train for quite a while now, but
Bijan Robinson podcast.
He's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
He's like the best running back I've seen enter the draft. I mean, certainly since Saquon.
Yep.
But he might be better just because he's just a better pure runner of the football and he does everything else. He's a little less freaky athletically, but I don't really think that matters that much when it's that close.
Yeah. It just got to the point last year where, you're kind of sick of going on 15 play drives, and when you're facing a light box every time and still not being able to run, it's like, come on. At some point you have to go get more explosive. So
yeah, it's tough to run the ball out of 11 in the NFL though, in general, especially if your offensive line isn't superior.
Yeah.
And the Bengals offensive line for most of the year was fine. I don't think it was. I think the playoffs left a bad taste in people's mouths, but you got to remember everybody was hurt.
Right.
And they played Chris Jones. I mean, whatever. It doesn't work out the way you want it to every time. But I agree. It's certainly frustrating when you get those 6-man boxes and you can't rip off a 50-yarder. Even every once in a while,
5-yarder.
Oh God. I mean, and a big part of running a lot of what they want to run, for instance, one of their favorite run schemes is duo, and you leave the corner unblocked. So you leave the corner unblocked because he sucks at tackling. Corners suck at tackling. You ask any OC who you want to try to go make the tackle, it's the corner because he sucks at it. And they're just not making a miss.
Yeah, that's so
it's
frustrating.
Designed for that.
Ugh.
Yeah, you're talking to the choir here, man.
So we won't go super long today, and I think this will be a fun place to wrap up. I think that you kind of put it perfectly. The juice was really lacking from the Bengals backfield last year. And obviously, it's still lacking now. I mean, we have the same cast of characters minus Samaje Perine coming back to the backfield for 2023. Chris Evans is still on the roster, so maybe you're going to get some juice there, but I'm not overwhelmed with Chris Evans at this point, and I don't think the Bengals – I have no reason to think the Bengals are. Who are some of the running backs in this draft class that you would think – and maybe it's hard to find guys that fit the Bengals threshold. There's a lot of smaller running backs in this class, to be honest. But guys that you think would – I don't know if they're necessarily happy Bengals fits, but really give the juice to this offense that it needs. Because as we've seen, I mean, it doesn't take the highest pick. I mean, we've seen Isaiah Pacheco really add some juice to that Chiefs offense.
Yeah, for sure.
Isaiah Pacheco is everyone's favorite example right now, but I think it does.
Dameon Pierce even.
Yeah.
You know, Dameon Pierce on a crappy Texans team had juice, and he's not fast.
So who are some of those backs that you like in this class for us to wrap up today?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just like tight end, and which is why this draft is shaping up so kind of nicely for the Bengals. In that, like, there's a bunch of guys. I don't think it's Jahmyr Gibbs, even though, like, Jahmyr Gibbs is that guy as a mover, as a ball carrier. He can't pass protect, and that's gonna, like, just given the way the Bengals run their offense, that's not gonna work. You can't, like, you're not gonna leave the tight end in the protection all the time. Like, they're just not, especially not since he's 6'2", 240. So they're going to need a guy who can kind of at least do it serviceably, and he can't, at least not on tape. Although if they could ever figure that out with him, that would be pretty special. I think Israel Abanikanda is a good idea, just because, like, he's such a home run threat, but, like, he's stout. He's a great downhill gap runner. So, like, you know, he can really hit on inside zone, duo counter, all the stuff that the Bengals really like to run. Although I think I think I could definitely see him ending up in San Francisco as well, and running a lot of that wide zone. But, like, yeah, I mean, Tyjae Spears, if they want to really lean into the spread a little bit and get a guy who can run routes, and sort of doesn't have to worry about too many heavy boxes and can run in plain space and do all that stuff. So it's really interesting. They have a bunch of guys. I think a lot of the guys people like work, and I think they can make it work. Like, I don't think necessarily, you know, guys that can't protect or guys that can't, you know, run between the tackles are necessarily great options. But, like, I mean, like, how many of those are there anyway? Like, not that many.
Well, I think that this is a good place for us to wrap it. Max, you've been a great guest for us. Hopefully we'll have you back on after the draft to talk about some of what's ahead with the picks the Bengals actually made for 2023. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Make sure you check out some of his stuff he's got going on over at In the Valley Shook. Also follow him at Max Toscano 1 on Twitter. We gotta get you just the plain name. We gotta buy it out, man. Get you just Max Toscano on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that wasn't available when I made it, which is rather unfortunate. But, you know,
we'll figure it out someday. It'll be a miracle. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. And hoo day.
Hoo day.
Yeah.